This is my indie game, Pearl Essential, an exploration-minded monstrosity. And I'm Ali. Thanks for stopping by. Welcome to the devlog. Last video focused on my design process by examining my game's lifting mechanic, a pretty nifty feature I had implemented. I've been working on a few things since the previous video, but for this devlog, I want to focus on just one of them. This mechanic is a pretty big staple in the genre, if not the medium. Let's talk about chests. Yes, chests. You know, with the... that sometimes... yeah, those things. I knew pretty quickly I want Pearl Essential to have chests. Every RPG needs chests, so let's add some. But first, we should establish some background. Chests in games are obviously meant to associate with their real-world counterparts. You know, skeuomorphism and all. But I don't seriously own or use chests in my day-to-day life, and I expect neither do you. I guess I use chest-like things, say a fridge, but other than that, not really. Anyway, chests are incredibly prevalent in video games, and while non-gamers might pass them off as environmental fluff, anyone familiar with the medium is simply drawn to them. No questions asked. They're too alluring to ignore. In almost every circumstance chests appear in, they can be opened to receive items and rewards that help the player progress towards the game objective. This concept is so well established, there are many resources that describe it. It's a well-worn trope, and with every trope comes its subversions. And that's what I would like to pick at today, if you'd even count this as a subversion. If you're like me and watch a concerning amount of YouTube, you may have stumbled across a video of someone playing a randomizer. You know, those videos where people play games but the items are seemingly in the wrong places? Link7 has covered many Zelda ones, but there are mods for almost any game out there. Although, let's back it up a bit. What exactly is a randomizer? According to the big list of video game randomizers, randomizers are game modifications and utilities that randomly arranges original game data in a way that significantly increase their replayability. While it matters on the game and the randomizers, these are mods that basically shuffle around game items / objects to make a game playthrough unique. Doing this, technically, goes against the designer's original intentions, but on the other hand, it presents the player with new challenges and opportunities. It's very interesting to watch, and the mechanic is actually quite popular. To be completely honest, I bet you've played a randomizer. Well, I brought up modding first. Randomizers are present out of the box in some experiences. This game is randomized, and technically, so is this one. Rogue-ish games, and games with a lot of procedurally generated content, are practically randomizers if you ask me. Just like the mods mentioned earlier, these experiences all do one big thing. They disregard static content. So, most games like to have set rewards. These are rewards that remain static and consistent. The game's designers place them intentionally throughout the experience, and the experience is designed with these placements in mind. All players will receive the rewards similarly, if they don't outright miss them, and it's possible for a player to go to a specific location if they want a specific reward. Rogue-ish games and randomizers don't really do this. They inherently shuffle things around, leading to unique experiences between players. Never mind that, the same player will be greeted with a unique experience between save files or repeated playthroughs. This is what the quote from earlier was poking at by mentioning replayability. By shuffling around game rewards or other content, these experiences push back against one of the many things that can make a game go stale: predictability. While it differs from person to person and matters on the specific situation, being able to predict outcomes can reduce a person's interest in something. When you go into a movie already knowing how the plot will proceed, your enjoyment takes a bit of a hit. Obviously, it's not like this stops people from hitting the theater multiple times for the same thing. There are many factors that play into enjoying cinema. But I have a feeling by the time you can recite the screenplay from memory, you are not paying Cineplex $50 again, so that one plot twist can surprise you. Humans seek novelty. There are studies on its connection with our dopaminergic reward pathways. You know, the silly brain chemicals? By presenting the player with something new, a game designer can keep a player retained and engaged. And while I know it sounds like I'm walking blindly into some pretty dark patterns, this is still really important and not inherently malicious. To make an enjoyable game, exploiting how the player's brain works goes a really long way. You can choose not to, but it's kind of absurd. At that point, you are intentionally not designing for humans, the subject the product is usually for. But to each their own. Games are fundamentally illusions. Using tricks like novelty is inherent to keeping the smoke and mirrors intact. A lot of people in the industry know this and use it, although I can't deny, usually for unsavory reasons. A lot of very memorable experiences exist due to both us, the audience, and creators behind such incredible works chasing novelty. Ever wonder why every Zelda game has weird new game mechanics? They literally jumped from boats to wolves. And why did they decide to put Mario in space, or even make him a doctor? This plays an even bigger role within the experience. Tetris on the NES doesn't change color every level willy-nilly, and Hades is carefully crafted to provide new dialogue between runs. These are design choices that, I argue, engage the player biochemically. Anyway, let's stay focused. Randomizing game content is a tool game designers can use to introduce novelty, a characteristic our brains are drawn to. So, like the great thief I am, I saw this out in the wild and decided to implement it in Pearl Essential. I plan to have the chests in my game give out random content. Let me give you a breakdown. The mechanic is chest loot. What we want is for the player to receive a random item when a chest is opened. This exists to slightly undermine the player's previously obtained knowledge and continuously provide a sense of novelty in this aspect of the game. But there's a slight problem. Wasn't this a linear game? If the player receives the game's best sword in the starter town, their experience will get mutilated by reduced difficulty for the remainder of the playthrough. And what if the player receives no swords and can't fight at all? Now they're hardlocked. This mechanic needs to have restrictions to limit/constrain the randomization. That way, I can still achieve specific design goals that have already been established. Lastly, I personally hate rerolls, and I can see it being a bit detrimental for what we're going for, so this mechanic needs a tiny bit of logic to prevent or circumvent that in some manner. It seems like a bit much, but I think I got this. Last time, I put some code up on screen, but this is a bit more complicated and intertwined with a few other systems and game objects. I think I'll skip out on the explicit details. Totally not because I wrote some horrendous fucking code. First, we need a chest. This'll work. I hooked it up to the interaction system and added a simple animation. Now for the backend. We need to choose an item to give the player. I already have a database, but we can't pick from it randomly. We need to set up a control system. Pearl Essential doesn't have explicit levels, but behind the scenes there are still delineations in power, which I call threat and power levels. Yeah, I know, ironic. These range from 1 to 5-ish, and all enemies and items are scaled around them. This is one of our means of control. By hacking up the game map into pieces, we can have certain areas where items are more likely to be found, and others where they can never be found. This can relate to the amount of challenge in those areas, and what's expected for the player to overcome them. Let's divvy up the main database into smaller ones. Now, I can write some code so the loot distribution logic picks from a specific list depending on how it's configured. I can use where a chest is found to configure the randomization controls, or something else entirely. Ultimately, the designer is at the helm and decides how to bend the realm. With this, I can now prevent the Demon King's sword from falling out of the chest beside the Chicken Keeper's farm, and vice versa. You won't find a rusty pitchfork raiding the coffers of a grand castle. In a roundabout way, it seems like I'm overcomplicating what will simply devolve into x shows up here and y shows up there. But the goal is to have it so x really is a variable. If we have multiple low-level items, we want it so almost any of them can appear in a low-level area in any order. To jump back into metaphor, beside a chicken coop could be a pitchfork, a random stick, a rake, or old armor. This is dandy and all, but kinda basic, don't you think? Within areas, there's probably still some difference between items that we want to control. Something more one of a kind, like the childhood friend's pendant, or the mayor's old shield. You know, the one from his glory days. Things like that should be restricted to show up in more fitting areas. And they can, by just setting them. That will always remain an option. But I also put in a 3-tier rarity system to work as a sub-control. We can restrain what a chest provides by not only picking from a specific list, but also filtering the list to a certain rarity. Heck, why not let us filter by item type also? With characteristic filters, I can make it so a chest spits out not just any random item, but a random piece of armor, or maybe a random weapon. The possibilities are finite, but quite varied. I added a few of these types of controls since having more knobs is always nice, but it's important to remember the dangers of getting too specific. This is sorta just playing a loose game of charades and asking the game to get as many items that sorta fit and pick one. But if we get too specific, the game will have fewer and fewer options until only one item could ever really be picked, which isn't what we want. With some controls in place, the last thing to touch on is reroll prevention. By just keeping track of what has already been given out, we can redo a random pick if something that's been distributed got picked again, or remove items that have already been distributed from the possible items to give out. Although this becomes a numbers game very rapidly. If we have less chests than the amount of items in the possibility space being picked from, each chest can distribute a unique item, and we don't have to worry about rerolls at all. This is great, but it also means the player can't access everything within the possibility space, which means missing out, and missing out kinda sucks. If we have more chests than the size of the possibility space, then eventually there will be nothing to pick from without redistributing what has already been given out. So, with these two scenarios in mind, the answer is to have exactly the right amount of chests, an amount that matches the number of items in the possibility space, right? Well, yes, sorta, but it's really annoying in practice since the amount of items in the possibility space is a bit wibbly wobbly, as things change a lot during development. I've decided to make a concession here and just go for an amount of chests greater than the size of the possibility space. Each chest will give out unique items until the possibilities are exhausted. If the player hits enough chests to exhaust the possibility space, we can reset the memory and restart the distribution. It's not great, but it lets me avoid the big issue I don't want, which is getting the same thing twice in close physical or temporal proximity constantly. This is very normal for gacha games and slot machines, and while those two things are very engaging, that's not the goal I'm aiming for. More or less, I won't avoid rerolls entirely, but I do want to prevent rerolling the same item right after you just got it, if I can. But with all of that implemented, now chests give out random content, and this randomness can be controlled somewhat so challenges surrounding it can be designed with its possible contents in mind. I'm very interested in what playtesters will think of this. That means you, by the way. You can check out this feature and the game itself by joining the game's Discord server. I've left a link down below. I'd love to hear feedback and suggestions since I don't really know what I'm doing. Now get to it, soldier! Go, 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 go! Or don't. I can't force you. So that's my little discussion on chests and stuff. I'd like to note once again that Pearl Essential isn't a roguelike, but I feel inclined to borrow this mechanic, and maybe future ones, to create something interesting. Synergizing mechanics from other mediums that are usually not seen together is one way to form very unique things. Just like other forms of design, recombination is another way to shape an ideal. I think that's all I wanted to talk about for today. Guess it's back to the grind. Oh, thank you for watching, by the way. Don't forget your things on the way out. If you don't mind, maybe leave a like, comment, or even subscribe. And until next time, see ya.